Skill-based movement is long forgotten in video games. Every new first-person shooter these days seems to be balanced around realism and stiff movement. It's a shame, really, because of how much depth it adds to a game. Bunny hopping, a specific type of skill-based movement, relies on repeatedly jumping to gain additional speed. It's been around since the early days of the Quake 1 engine, and has influenced many games. For example, Valve heavily modified Quake 1 to create their own engine, Gold Source, for a little game that you may have heard of. Because of the nature of the engine, it was incredibly simple to create mods for. Nearly 4 years after Half-Life, Natural Selection saw its release. It was a complex mod at the time, an RTS where the units were controlled by the players. Unlike Command & Conquer, it also relied on extremely asymmetrical gameplay. One end had you playing as the Marines, a military group of humans tasked with eliminating an alien infestation. They controlled much like an average first-person shooter, with a few twists. A commander would give orders to every Marine in the game and distribute weapons and buildings as he saw fit. Meanwhile, the opposite alien team, the Kara, played much differently. They were largely melee attackers that relied on speed and stealth to achieve victory. They didn't have a commander ordering them around. They simply relied on gestating into a builder unit to support the team. So what exactly does this have to do with bunny hopping? It's very simple. Natural selection was subjectively the best unintentional inclusion of the exploit of all time. It added an enormous amount of depth to the game. Marines moved very slowly on their own, but when you combine the environment and the quirks of the engine, you could pull off some incredibly useful jumps. Bunny hopping was eventually disabled for Marines, but the movement itself still had tons of depth. You could strafe alongside a wall to move faster, or even quickly tap the strafe left and right keys to gain additional speed. It was entirely based on the skill of the player, since it took tons of practice to learn. Aliens, on the other hand, could always bunny hop. However, when combined with class-specific movement mechanics, it made for an even more interesting experience. Skulks could leap around to control their movement in the air. Fades could blink forward at extreme speeds and then maintain their momentum while bunny hopping. Even lurks, who spent their time flying around, had a rather large learning curve. Pancaking, or moving up and down extremely quickly to avoid bullets, was commonplace and important to learn. The bunny hopping system was so intuitive that several maps were created to train the player's skills, and even show off what some more experienced players could do. ZE Marine B-Hop consisted of 5 lengthy levels that you could only surpass if you were a bunny hopping expert. It was an accomplishment to finish within the natural selection community. Despite Gold Source being extremely old, Valve once again took the engine and modified it heavily, turning it into its own source engine with Half-Life 2. This time around, they were more clear on their stance with bunny hopping and ensured that it was blocked by server commands by default. This didn't stop them from removing intentional skill-based mechanics. Team Fortress 2 was released nearly 9 years later. It featured a ton of classic jumping mechanics. Rocket jumping was incredibly important, while proper movement with scouts would also take a reasonable amount of practice. The twitch-heavy shooter was so well designed that it actually spawned its own skill-based game modes, demo and rocket jumping. Much like ZE Marine B-Hop, you progress through levels by propelling yourself through the air with either sticky bombs as a demo man or rockets as a soldier. There's always a clear goal to reach, so it's very easy to see a linear progression of skill. What other game would let you pogo on your own sticky grenades across a floor? Today, bunny hopping lives on in specific mods and game modes, but for all intents and purposes, it's effectively dead in modern gaming. Gary's Mod houses a fantastic bunny hopping server that records times and, well, allows you to go fast. Counter-Strike Source also has numerous servers that employ the bunny hopping game mode. Games like Call of Duty, Battlefield 3, and Global Offensive are largely devoid of skill-based movement, and it's a shame. So what was the point of this video then? If bunny hopping essentially died with the advent of realism in video games, why bother even talking about it? It's important that we look at successful game mechanics from the past and extrapolate any useful data we can. Call of Duty is subjectively boring to watch. The skill comes from memorization of spawns and maps, and a relatively small amount of aim and reaction time. As a spectator esport, it's largely useless. Natural Selection 2, the sequel to quite possibly the greatest Half-Life mod of all time, has also removed most skill-based movement. It's certainly still present in some forms, but it feels more boring and much of the magic has been lost in translation. Who knows what will happen though? It's possible that in the future, games like Warso and In Momentum will become commonplace amongst the standard gamer. Today, the Quake generation of gamers will just have to live with playing on dead bunny hopping servers.